a ton of participants here tonight already. The crowd is zooming in. Hello, welcome, welcome. I am Anne Choquette. I am the founder and CEO of New Power Media and very proud owner of TheLi.st. I am thrilled to have you all here tonight for our very first public launch with TheLi.st. And this is really such a special night because we are able to honor one of our own and one of the originals, Susan McPherson. We have such a huge crowd here. I want to give everybody just another minute, but let's bring Soledad and Susan in so I can give them a proper introduction and get this evening underway. Thank you guys so much, the both of you, for being here this evening. This is such a special night. First of all, I want to start by introducing Soledad O'Brien. We are so lucky to have this icon. I just want to say, an icon, award-winning journalist, philanthropist, author. I have a whole long list of a bio here. And the list of people that you are reporting for. First of all, you have your own show, Matter of Fact with Soledad O'Brien. You also report for HBO Sports, PBS NewsHour, WebMD, and you are the author of 2 books. So this book party, she's like cool as a cucumber this evening. What I love in this bio, my favorite part of this bio is you have 3 Emmys, a George Peabody Award, a DuPont Prize, a Gracie. But the best part is that Newsweek magazine named her one of the 15 people who make America great. And she's going to make our evening great. So thank you, Soledad, for being here with us. To fet the amazing Susan McPherson. I don't need your bio, Susan, to introduce you. The most important thing to know about Susan is that she is a serial connector. This is a woman who, from the earliest days of her life, found the power in connecting and making relationships. And it is her fame and her legacy that she has put into this book, the author of The Lost Art of Connecting. And so I am so thrilled to have you here, the both of you. I am going to tip out and leave it to the 2 of you to have this amazing conversation. And I will see you all at the end. One bit of housekeeping. If you have questions for Soledad and Susan, just put them in the Q&A and we'll catch you at the end. Thank you.
Thank you, Anne. And I am cool as a cucumber because I have a great job this evening. It is truly a pleasure to have the opportunity to interview Susan McPherson. When we first spoke, I remember thinking, this book sounds like a crazy idea. We are in the middle of a global pandemic and you're talking about connections. And I think people feel maybe less connection than ever before. But of course, this is exactly the kind of information we need right exactly at this moment, how technology can be an asset, not a crutch, especially now that we're coming out on this other side of this pandemic. And what strategies do we need to be able to do a better job in non-transactional relationships, but actually really deep connected relationships. So Susan McPherson, congratulations on the book. Thank you for talking with me. And as Anne mentioned, guys, if you have a question while we're talking, just throw it right into the Q&A. And as soon as I finish my moderated part of the conversation, we will pop in and start answering your questions right out of the Q&A. So Susan, first, congrats, how exciting. Walk me through a little bit, set it up for everybody. What is this book about and what drove you to write this book?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you. It is an honor to be here with you, Soledad. I have fangirled my entire existence since I've known you. And thank you to Anne Choquette and thank you to New Power Media and TheLi.st for hosting me on and making this occasion extraordinarily special. And I'm truly grateful. Interestingly enough, the book, the original impetus for the book was long before that we were living in a global pandemic. And it actually was written because I had seen just way too much over time, this notion of relying on clicks and likes and numbers of followers as our means of determining our connectivity, our social ability. And I kept thinking the kind of humanity was gone. And the actual tipping point was when someone, a dear friend of mine, told me that when she would walk her children to the bus stop and the children would get on the school bus and she would watch the bus roll away, all the children would just immediately sit there and then stare in their phones. And I thought to myself, whoa, 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 we are way too dependent on this technology. Then fast forward 2020, January, February, I start writing and the world shuts down. And guess what? All we have is this. All we have is our screens and our likes and our clicks. And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, what the heck am I going to do? This is the book. But interviewing 30 some odd, what I love to call characters, and many of you, when you read the book, you will see many of friends and people we all love. Part of the elephant in the room during the interviews was, how are you staying connected during this difficult time? What do you miss most about when we used to be together? So fast forward to today, I do feel we are finally getting that glimmer of being able to reemerge. And my hope is that because we actually learned what it was like not to hug, not to look people in the eye, yes, to become more reliant on technology, but to do so in a very intentional way, that when we reemerge, we have a do-over opportunity. We have a chance to actually really intentionally, with meaning, build relationships and not count the likes and the clicks. Because in 20 years, those platforms are all going to change anyways.
Are you seeing things today that gives you great hope that that vision that you describe is going to happen? I lean into agreeing with you that people are going to take the opportunity, because we miss physical connection. We miss like hanging out with people and just being around people and like hugging a friend who's down, or say, we just miss that. Are you seeing things in the environment that tell you that, yes, in fact, we're going to figure out how to manage that technology? And I've seen that same thing, right? And I've done that same thing. Even as you're saying goodbye, you're like, yeah, goodbye. I've got to answer this message right now, but I'm not really going to see you leave the room. What gives you hope about that?
Well, I think from what we've all experienced, which is in most cases, many collective grief and loss, which I think has made us, and I'm not a psychologist or a sociologist, but this notion of collective vulnerability. We have been so much more open with one another than we ever would have been before. And I fervently believe only good will come of that, because when you are more vulnerable and open, as scary as it may be, you allow others to be that way too. And therefore you open a dialogue of communication that previously didn't exist. And I don't think all of a sudden, and again, I don't think we're all of a sudden gonna like all run outside and do this collective hug and like have Times Square post World War II. I mean, I do think it's going to be gradual, and it is going to be a little bit like riding a bike, which I'll be riding my bike pretty soon, but there's always that first few blocks where I'm like, oh my God, I'm going to die. But I do believe that this hit home this year, and we don't want to go back and be this isolated. So I maybe I'm overly optimistic, but that is how I feel.
What's it like writing the book in a pandemic? Did it make you more focused, or I don't know, the fact that you couldn't really go out and be with people? I think that might make that experience even harder and more lonely in a way.
Well, I will tell you, 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago, I burst into tears because I thought to myself, how ridiculous is it to launch a book about connectivity when we are living in the most isolated existence in our lifetime? And my sister said to me very, very wisely, she said, no. And this is, I think, what you said earlier. This is the moment where this matters more than ever. So that helped. But I will say, over this past year, I have been alone personally since last March. And I've been single for 6 years. But I used to travel and run around and fill every moment so I didn't have to deal with something that I was actually terrified of, and that was being alone. So if there's one good output that has come out of this over a year, it has been the creation of the book. So maybe it's been in my fear and my loneliness that I was able to create this.
technology, social media, those likes and those clicks, I think it was always framed as liberating. Yeah. But I do think, as you describe it, right, at some point we become so obsessed that it defines kind of if something's good or not, right? It defines really, a value. So what do you make of, where do you see that going? Do you see, I think TikTok has in some ways help my teenagers just from the silly things, Washington Post TikTok guy, because sometimes school is stressful in an environment where you can't hang out with your friends, that social media in a way has really been a lifeline. But also, how do you see that changing as we reemerge? Because I think we're at the beginning of the end of this pandemic, mercifully. How do you see that really shifting and people's value of that shifting?
Well, I think there's going to be, it's going to stay. I mean, there's no, it is part of our existence. It's part of how we get news. It's how we consume information. It's how we share information. But I do at least think for the next year or so, we are going to put the personal before. Okay. Now you mentioned TikTok, and part of one of the topics in the book is finding what your chief differentiating factor is. And oftentimes young people who are fresh out of college and looking for what can they offer, you know what my first word is? TikTok. Because inevitably they may be able to help older generations understand TikTok. I digress, but I think that, you had mentioned it, and I think it's important that in some ways, sometimes, yes, these social platforms distance us, but sometimes they're also a way to bring us together, right? And help us celebrate things and honor things.
I love that idea about what differentiates you, because I would not have gotten through this pandemic without my teenagers who've allowed me to set up lights and computers, and my 16-year-old son was shooting our show for a while. I mean, just incredibly, incredibly helpful. But you raise an interesting point, which is this idea of how we connect. And I find you write about this a lot, that sometimes our connections are very transactional, right? And have you seen that historically? Do you think that's going to change? And how do you change it? How do you go into those conversations with, how can I help you? How can I bring my expertise, even as a young person right out of college who might seem on paper not to have a ton to offer at this moment? How can I add value? How do you do that?
Well, first of all, every single one of us, no matter who we are, where we came from, where we grew up, what our heritage is, we have things to offer. And, I joke about the TikTok, but you mentioned about your teenagers helping you with the technology, right? I mean, every single person, and sometimes the most other people have the most to offer, right? Because it's something that we don't know in whatever we means. And the book is divided into 3 sections: gather, ask, do. And the gather component is where you do that inner soul searching and really figure out not only what is your secret power, your secret sauce, but also what is the world you want to build around you? What is the community you want to build? How are you going to make sure that your community doesn't look and act just like you? Because quite frankly, you won't learn anything if they're all the same. And then the next kind of level, and mind you, this is not something that just happens linearly. It would help if I could speak tonight.
I know what you mean. Totally fine.
Is the ask. And the ask is not what you think. It's not learning to ask for what you need, but learning the art of asking others the questions so you can find out what is vital in their life right now. Okay. And following that, you do something that humans are inherently poor at, and that is listening. Because if you ask people the questions that are actually going to give you those breadcrumbs, those detailed pieces of knowledge that then give you the power to be able to be supportive, then you get to the do. And the do is not putting others always before you. I'm not suggesting, because we know sometimes, certainly women, we put others in front and don't put the air mask on ourselves first. No. This is truly about living a life of supporting others, but through that, you are supporting yourself. And do is all about becoming that person who is reliable, trustworthy, someone who can be counted on. And I'm going to go so far as being known as saying, you want to be that person who's known as someone who gets shit done.
So how do you think about doing that while we're still in isolation? And let's assume we're going to go through the summer, maybe into the fall. How do you build these relationships that what you're describing is a great, like that's a great friend, right? That's the friend who shows up when you need her. That's the friend who, even when she doesn't spell out exactly what you need, when you don't spell it out, she shows up with what you need, right? A good listener, a person who asks, how can I help? How do we, in this moment of time when we're dealing with, an isolating time in our lives, how do you create friendships that have depth? How do you do that to the friendships you have already?
Well, I think this is the perfect time to do this because I think this is the time where it is actually maybe not opportunistic, but I think that people need each other right now, okay? And there is absolutely nothing wrong, even if it's a professional relationship, picking up the phone and calling a colleague from the other side of the country or down the street and saying, how are you doing? Truly. I know, you've suffered loss during this pandemic. What if anything I can be doing to help? This is the time to do that, okay? And I realize it may seem like, oh, I don't have time. Doing things like this actually gives you time. It makes you more truly efficient and effective as a human being because you inevitably, and I know this sounds ridiculous, but what goes around comes around. And I joke, and there's a few of my colleagues I think watching, and certainly a few of our clients. My company's 8 years old. 98% of our business has been inbound. When I was 25, when I was 35, and I was building relationships, friendships, sales relationships, etc., I wasn't thinking, when I'm 48, I'm going to launch a company and I'm going to come a calling. Okay. So, I mean, there is lessons to be learned in that.
Yeah, or that, you'd be in a pandemic and you'd want to have deeper connections, that you meet people and not just, a lot of those conversations sound very personal, but you're really talking about professional relationships, right? Like it's okay to call up professional contacts and say, how are you? What can I do for you? Which I think we've often put into the realm of that's for your bestie and that's for your best friend and your close friends. That's not a work conversation. I think you're exactly right. I think the pandemic has really changed these conversations.
Yeah.
You talk a lot about, go ahead. Sorry, Susan.
I was going to say, I think it's also, for the most part, made the business world and the corporate world more empathetic and compassionate. And honestly, I don't think that's going away. I mean, the work, obviously, that my firm does, McPherson Strategies, is all around corporate responsibility and social impact. And, we've seen this slow kind of over the last 15, 20 years, this kind of, it used to be a nice to have, now it's a must have. It's not going away. Mm-hmm. And I can only think that good will come of that.
Yeah, I think that's very true. And I think people are very much judging the places where they shop, where they work, the people who they do business with on those measures. They want to see, are you an empathetic company who likes your employees and likes your clients and cares about their well-being? I think that's really true. You lean very heavily into diversity of your connections. Talk to me a little bit about that. Why is that so important?
Well, quite frankly, it's the only way to learn and advance your own knowledge if you surround yourself with people who are not like you. And our world is not like you. And I mean that by that proverbial you, right? I mean, if you want to be a successful business, you have to not only hire people that don't look like you, because you're selling to people that don't look like you, correct? And I'm often asked, how in your community, in your network, are you going to be able to diversify it? And the first place to start is with the people you know. And we are living at a time when it is totally right thing to do to say to your friends, to say to your colleagues, I need to diversify my network. I know people who don't look like me, and I want to be introduced to them. And that is totally acceptable. And and you will actually excel if you do that.
Dig into that for me a little bit deeper, because 2020 has been a stressful year on top of all of these conversations around racial unrest, and we're having lots of conversations around race And I think when you're talking about diversity, you're talking about diversity in every which way, but also gender diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, any way you slice and dice it. How do we move off? Give me advice, like very tactical. How do we move out of our bubbles, right? Because we love bubbles. Bubbles are nice and they're safe. And I'm not worried I'm going to say the wrong thing in my bubble. And I know when I tell a joke, everyone's going to think it's funny in my bubble. Because I love my bubble. But
my bubble doesn't find me funny.
my bubble might be lying to me that they find me funny. But and then the minute, of course, you break out of your bubble, it's more challenging. So give people very specific advice about how to do that, how to literally move out of their bubble, and what the upside potentially can be.
Sure. Well, first and foremost, I mean, I'm not an expert in this. I have just made a life of building meaningful relationships.
So you are an expert, but go ahead.
But one of the things that I have found over time that has been very illuminating to me, and that is volunteer service and supporting organizations that are needing, whether it's my expertise, whether it's helping them fundraise, whether it's supporting financially, whether it's donation, you name it, whether it's introductions. But volunteering is a tremendous way to actually expose yourself to people who are not like you. And and you will learn as well, because you may learn new skills, you'll be introduced to new people. Okay. That is one very tactical way. And it's something that I've done every time I've moved to new cities for, various and sundry. Okay. The second is literally just ask people okay. It is not wrong for me to say to Anne Choquette, Anne, I know let's say Tina Wells. She is a prominent Black woman who I adore. I want to meet her. I want to learn from her. I want to learn her life experience. That is a good thing to do, and an important thing to do. And if we all did more of that, we would actually meet more people. There's a woman in the audience, Marcy Alberer, who works for an organization called Encore. Encore is all about helping people connect with intergenerational people. Get involved in an organization like that, okay? I mean, there was a time in my life, I remember maybe I should be telling my own advice because I don't know any men. So maybe I need to be talking to people so that I can meet more men.
Absolutely. I think you just put it out here I like that. I like that advice. But it sounds to me like that really reinforces the idea of you don't lead with, especially when you're volunteering, like, hey, so here's what I need from you.
No.
With, hi, I'm here to volunteer. What can I do for you? And it's that kind of gets that conversation going.
It's two things. It's finding out what the needs of that organization is, and also knowing what you're good at, knowing what you can offer, right? And that, again, I hate to, I guess I'm supposed to market a book, but
obviously, yes.
That is part of the gather component, where you can do that self-reflection and really intentionally think about the community you want to build around yourself.
Do you worry about young people? I think a lot of people our age look at, like, we've learned this slowly over time with lots of mistakes, right? We kind of intellectually get it. I'm not sure my daughters in their 20s really get it. And my sons, right, who are a little bit younger, like, I'm not sure that they have grown up with technology.
Right.
How do we teach them how to leverage what's great about the technology, because they are native, so they're masters at it, but also teach them the art of human connection, right, which is so critical to, I think, success in any way you measure it.
Well, I think imitation is the best form of flattery, and I think we should be living lives and demonstrating that, and living lives of leading with how can I be helpful and how can I be supportive, rather than, I mean, I'm not going to say blame, but I learned all of this from my parents. I joke in the book, but it's true. At the breakfast table every morning, I had to vie for real estate to put my bowl of cereal, because both my parents had the 5 local newspapers spread out. And yesterday's New York Times, because of course it came the day late, and they would be clipping and cutting and literally putting into envelopes and writing to third cousin Harry, Charlotte, who lived across the country, former colleagues, and just saying, I'm thinking of you. So it was very ingrained. In fact, I thought everybody's parents did that. So I think, if you are a parent, this is a great, you can show them. I mean, Soledad, on social media, you showcase so many people. Show your children that, I mean, that will, right there, it's shining lights on others. It's helping others. It's showing up for others.
Do you ever worry, and I have seen this not just in my life, but my friends, that sometimes for women, we do a lot of asking, what do you need? And not enough of the, not that it should be transactional, but I think we've all been there where you've looked up and you said, oh, this is an unbalanced relationship. And I see that, in women as well. And I know you've got advice about that as well.
Well, there are always going to be times where you do more. It just is, okay? And there's also going to be people who just take, okay? And one of the beauties of getting older, I'm 56 right now, and boy, if I had the knowledge I had now when I was in my 30s, and what a better time it would have been, right? However, I have to say that it's okay to walk away from the people who are takers, okay? And it's okay to be tipping the balance and being more of a giver during a certain time, because you know what, there will come a time where you're going to need. But I will also say, for those of you who are younger and not yet comfortable to step up and say when you need something, it's a great skill to learn. And I think that's another lesson learned through this pandemic is I think we've gotten better for asking for help.
I would agree with that. I think we've begun to also meet people halfway.
Yeah.
Right. So interesting. In my office, we really started making it mandatory some of the time to have your camera on, because you could just feel people being sapped by, being at home in their apartments, hour after hour after hour, and really both asking, are you okay? And telling, say what you need so people can go and meet this need for you. I think that's really important. What do you think the next few months are going to look like because I think your description is right. It's going to be a process as we come through, right? Some businesses are going to be open, partly open, halfway open, occasionally open, and it'll all be, layered on top. Schools will come back or partly back or, mixed or whatever. How do you see the next few months playing out for people? And what should we be doing in this moment of time as we kind of head that way?
Well, this is actually what is, to me, is exciting. Once I got over my fear of launching a book about a connection when we can't connect, but is this notion of we now have a do-over. We have an opportunity right now in the next month to be the next few months, as things slowly reopen, to be very intentional. And, to really go through and I hate to call it our LinkedIn community or whatever our community, but also our colleagues, and really reach out and reconnect, get a sense of where people are and ask them kind of what are they looking forward to. And I do think if we do that, we do have a chance to reemerge and build more meaningful and deeper relationships. But it's going to be, again, depending on where you live. I mean, so much is going to depend on, what laws are passed and everything else. And, I don't have a crystal ball where I can say, but I think given that what we can control is our own actions. And I think, this is a good time to really do that collective soul searching. If you're young, think about what is the community, hell, if you're old, if you're whatever age, this is the time to actually really think about what is it over the next 4 years, 4 months, 4 weeks that you want to accomplish. How can you do that? What do you personally have to bring forth to be able to offer? And then you'll be that much more set up to actually do when that moment comes. That I don't think there's going to be a moment, but I do think that we are blessed with a reset that we've never had before.
Before I get to my last question with you, which will then tee up our audience Q&A, I wanted just to remind anybody, if you have a question, just pop it right into the Q&A, and I'm going to go through that in just a moment after this question, and we'll get through all of them. The question that I have, Susan, is what do you want people to take away from this book? If for people who get this book and say, okay, here's what you need to learn from this book. The whole point of this is what?
Well, one of the most interesting facts that I learned, well, 2 facts. One, you actually most likely will live a longer life if you are more intentional in building your connections. I think that's a pretty good reason to care. Secondly, you will be, from a professional standpoint, more successful. And third, people you have never even met actually have influenced your life through the connections you have made. So those are three fun little and important.
Amazing.
Whether you read my book or anyone else's, I think
that your book. No, you read your book. No, but I think that's amazing, right? Success in life as a whole and extending it. Success in life in terms of being successful in whatever you want to be doing. I think that's all about networks and even the people you don't know who are in your network in some capacity. It's really important. I love it. So let's open our Q&A because people are popping questions in there like crazy. Amy says, congrats, Susan. So Amy, that's not a question, but we're going to take it because I love that. Thank you. April writes this. I'm so thrilled to be here. Congrats, Susan. Here's my question. Friends and colleagues in China say that unfortunately, quote, nothing seems to have been learned from the pandemic in terms of social relationships and reframing our balance with technology. This is incredibly disheartening. How ought we be more proactive to avoid this kind of outcome in other countries? This is not, by the way, a criticism of any particular place. It's just an observation of a risk we all run. It just so happens that China got a glimpse of post-COVID life first.
I'm a little confused as to what the exact question is.
I think the question is that the takeaway seems to be nothing has been learned, and what are the things that we should be learning through the pandemic? What were the things that you tick off that Americans could through the last really truly miserable, I think for most of us, year, could say, okay, but here's what we've learned. Here's how we turn this into something that's been learned. It sounds like our friends and colleagues in China look around at their connections and say, nothing has been learned.
April is a global citizen, and thank you so much for coming, April. It's wonderful to see you here, although I can't see you. But I would say, this, if anything, I think, and I can't speak for the people of China, but I think on average, most Americans are really missing connections with their loved ones, with their liked ones. So I have to believe that, and again, maybe I'm drinking too much of the Kool-Aid, but I think people are going to be taking less advantage of their relationships than they were before.
I agree with you on that. I also think we're learning to use technology in ways that support real life interactions. I mean, for example, you would see so many of these, I don't know, police and fire departments, right, come and celebrate a kid's birthday. Well, all of that was clearly organized, and networked, not face to face. And I just thought, like, wow, that's a really great way, in a safe way, to make someone feel special and leveraging the technology to get it done. But it's not about the technology in the moment that it's happening. I actually think people did a lot of really creative things. And oh my goodness, teachers. And when teachers, how to engage a class, teachers literally should all just be given bags of money for what they've been doing. Right? I think you're right about that. I think there have been real lessons that are learned.
Oh, for sure.
So Dawn says, oh my God, Susan, you look fantastic. Huge congrats on this book, XO. I feel like I'm opening your private mail. April writes this, I love that the ask is what is vital in someone else's life, finding new ways to serve, perhaps discovering something else you share in common. This is such a great point. And I thought the same thing as April. Like, I love reframing it as, here, what do you need? It's so much more comfortable than to go in and do this transactional thing. How do people figure out, do you think, Susan, what their superpower is? Like, I think my daughters, if they were here, would say, well, I don't know what I'm good at. I don't know what I can deliver. I don't know what I have to offer exactly. How do you figure that out?
Well, I don't have the perfect answer, but I do think it is an exercise. I think you can certainly ask people who know you well too. I think it's fair. I mean, I joke, but in 2008, I went away with 7 girlfriends with the goal of the weekend in the Catskills was we were not going to leave the house we rented until we came up with our secret superpowers, our elevator speeches. And it was that weekend that I actually coined the term, I am a serial connector, which at the end of the weekend, I knew I had to come up with it fast or I would still be in that house in the Catskills, which actually would have been an okay thing. It was a nice house. But I remember saying it and wanting to pee in my pants because it sounded so ridiculous. But there is something to be said about when you are finally have the confidence to be able to say something that you are talented at, that you are good at, that you can actually own. It opens up a world of possibilities. And fast forward to 2021, and I've written a book about it. Yeah. So I think the lesson there is not a magic like how to. There is a lot of deep soul circuits surfing. But I can tell you that weekend, I did a lot of question asking of others, saying, when you think of me, what do you think? And I had 7 or 8 very honest friends who were very forthright in sharing that.
I love that. I think that's really important. I do think naming things is a kind of the first step to being able to wrap your head around, okay, this is what I am. So then what are the components of that? What are the pieces of that? And what steps do I need to take to get to the next level of that as well? Here's a great quote. As a child, my dad reminded me every day before I went to school, remember, the more different someone is from you, the more interesting they are to get to know. That's fascinating. Why on earth would you want to spend your time with people who look like you, eat like you, talk like you? That sounds so boring. That's all a quote from Dad. I thought this was how all children are taught. It's obviously not the case. She gives a suggestion, but I'm going to ask the question. How do we think about moving our kids in this direction? Because I actually think that's a big ask, right? Especially kids as they get to the 10-year-old, 11-year-old, right? You really literally want to all be little clones of each other. And I think it's hard to say, go and find that person who's much more unlike yourself and go and get to know them. I think as adults, we might be more inclined to do that. I'm pretty sure my boys would run. Let me tell you, I think they really would. Like, I think that's exactly everything that they would find very distressing to do that, even though we would both say that the value of that is huge. How do you get your kids to do that?
Well, I'm childless, so it's very difficult for me to answer that question because I haven't raised children. But I will tell you, when I was growing up in upstate New York, I was Jewish and I knew one other Jew. Okay. All through elementary, high school, and in 5th grade on the playground, I can still remember her name. I won't repeat it, but she said to me, "You're going to hell because you killed Christ."
And okay, so sorry, you gotta name her. Come on, Susan, name her. This is the chance.
No, because I would imagine she has so been educated.
I know, I'm just kidding.
But the point being is all I wanted to be was like everyone else, right? And of course, I at that point was othered. I mean, I would never go so far as to say that my experience is anything like people of color in this country. So I want to obviously be very upfront about that. But boy, did I just want to have peanut butter and jelly sandwiches instead of like weird lip tower cheese or whatever the heck my mother would give me. But you know, it also, as I grew, it made me realize, you know what, I'm kind of special. I'm different, right? But I can tell, I'm sure children today, yes, we all want to be the same. So I do think it's really important for parents to be able to showcase the power of being different and what that will lead to. But, you know, as not being a parent, I don't have the tools probably as you and certainly Anne and other
You're all just guessing and making it up. So I think you actually nailed it right there. Nancy says, do you ever sleep? Which is not a question you have to answer, but I think she's saying, hey, and congratulations. This is a great question from Julie. Susan, you're an expert at connecting, but it isn't always easy when your personal and professional lives overlap. What are some of the situations you faced in this regard? And how do you, what's your strategy for dealing with tough moments?
I have always, there's never been a work Susan and a home Susan. And I can't say whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, but I found early on that it was exhausting trying to be two people. And for good or for bad, I was always that person in corporate America that you could tell what I was thinking. Okay. That is not what I would recommend to everyone. You know, my late mother always said I wore my heart on my sleeve. And for those close to me, they know that. But, you know, now after living through 1 year of a pandemic, I'm sure as hell glad that I am able to be that same person. And I think I have been a better manager for my employees because there is not a work Susan and a home Susan, because she is one person and she has a big heart and she cares about her employees, and she cares about how her clients are. So, Julie, thank you for asking the question. I honestly, it's hard in this kind of pressurized moment to think of an example, but I will come back to you on that.
We have so many questions, so I'm just going to keep throwing them at you. This one's from Chloe. Did you learn anything that surprised you about connecting while you were writing the book, or made you change the way you connect with people?
Thank you, Chloe, for asking that. Honestly, I think it actually reconfirmed in my mind that I was doing the right thing. And maybe you have to write a book to actually convince yourself that you've been doing the right thing all along. But I definitely was very surprised to learn about the longevity and the health aspects that come from building meaningful relationships.
This is from someone who didn't leave their name. In your opinion, what's the best way to network for new jobs or business opportunities during this time?
Well, I always recommend starting with the people that you know. And I think it is the perfect opportunity because, again, the playing fields have been leveled. So there is nothing inappropriate. Nobody would be like, oh, I thought that person was super happy with their job. This is going to be an enormous opportunity for all of us to do some change making, maybe taking that trip we've always wanted to go on. So to me, like, start with the people you know and go so far as not just writing them and saying, hey, can you help me? But reaching out to them, asking them first how they are, how you can be helpful to them, and then let them know that you have decided to start looking around and here are some ways they can be helpful to you.
This is from Pamela, and such a good question. Has there ever been a connection you regretted? And how did you extricate yourself graciously?
Oh, gosh. It's so hard to think of these on the spot.
I know.
Like if I had known, before, oh my God, I am sure. But I think that's happened more in my dating life than in my personal and professional life. How does that sound?
That sounds good. You could also jump into these Q&As later and answer any of these questions if you want to. This is a great question from Jean. What's the first step to becoming the awesome Susan McPherson? Of course, I'm buying the book, but really, what's the first step? Is it, starting with asking? Is it starting with listening?
Well, and if I was to follow the book, it would be doing the gather where you first determine what is it that you are hoping for. What in the next 4 years, 4 months, 4 weeks, 4 days do you want to actually see happen? And the asking is extraordinarily important. Really being upfront about learning how to ask questions that elicit meaningful responses. And I think, Jeannie, your point of listening, learning how to listen. And there are more TED Talks than you can imagine on how to listen. So if there's any exercise other than maybe reading the book, is go listen to some TED Talks. There was a question above that I thought was really good. That was, tell us your favorite stories of a connection.
Yes.
Can I answer that?
You do, yes.
Very, very quickly. Through a friend of mine, I got a random email back in 2017. I serve on the board of the U.S. arm of UNHCR, the UN High Commission for Refugees. And the email said, Susan, my friend who's a filmmaker wants to get into a refugee camp tomorrow. Can you help? And I was so busy that day. And I thought to myself, oh my God, the last thing the world needs is another documentary film about refugees that no one's going to see. But for whatever reason, the friend who was asking, I adore. And I decided, you know what, I'm going to see what I can do. And lo and behold, I was able to make something happen. And he was able to get into the camp, the UNHCR camp in Lesbos the next day. Fast forward, not only has he become a dear, dear friend, Brant Anderson, he's a major Hollywood filmmaker, not a documentary filmmaker. He went on to, when I then went and asked him, he went to one of the refugee camps on the Syrian border, brought 9 other filmmakers and spent 2 weeks teaching young children how to make films, documenting the stories of their fleeing of Syria. Not only that, he went on to make a film about refugees, which was a 20-minute short that Angelina Jolie introduced at a major UNHCR meeting. So the point being is, if I had said, I'm too busy, I'm not going to help out, none of all that would have happened. And millions of dollars have been raised to help refugees. And honestly, when I think about those young kids, that were able to learn how to actually tell their stories in a way that preserves those stories for the world to know, to me, I get the chills.
Oh, that's such a great story. We have just a few more minutes left, so I'm going to try to get as many questions in as I can. This is a great one from Allison. What's the best way to connect through a divide, race or politics, etc., in a way that's not disingenuous? Cancel culture is so pervasive and instills fear of doing practically everything, including this, wrong. Welcome your advice, Susan, and deepest congrats on such a meaningful book.
Thank you, Allie. Thank you. And that coming from someone who's written so many successful books, I'm honored. I think leading with how to be human and leading with your real self, and admitting what you don't know. Okay, I think sometimes we walk through life and try to be so confident and concerned. I think this is an area it's important for us to admit when we've made mistakes, when we haven't always said and done the right thing, because you know what, every single one of us have been in those situations. So to me, I think that leading with that humanity and that honesty, as painful or scary as that may be.
Margaret says, what's your number one tip to making connections later in life? And I might add to that also, Nicole asked about, what advice do you have for people who are shy about reaching out and making connections? So maybe you can put those two together.
Sure. Well, I think in terms of shy, there's a whole bunch of chapters in the book about, or information about why this actually makes sense for introverts. I was fortunate enough to interview one of the world's best known introverts, Maura Aarons-Mele, who wrote the book Hiding in the Bathroom. And actually, this type of connecting is much more comforting to someone who is introverted, because it's not one to many. We're not talking about like, you need to go out and meet 500 people. This is having a meaningful and rich conversation with 3 people, okay? So I think from somebody who might be shy, that might be an easier model. And if you are going to that event, whether it's an online or hopefully soon an in-person event, I like to say think of it in 3s. Meet 3 people, share 3 facts, and learn 3 new things. Margaret, for people of age, I sometimes wonder what I had to talk about when I was in my 20s. I think the thing about meeting people later in life, our bag of tricks is so much richer. So I think just pull from those bag of tricks of all the exciting and interesting things you've experienced in your life, and that helps you. And I also I have to say, there are so many communities from which we can join, whether it's Tonight, The Wolfer, The List, Luminary, We Suite. There's so many ways now that we connect that Soledad's a few years younger than me, so I'm just going to say our
the same age. No, but go ahead. But I'm 25. At least that's what I tell people.
When I was in my my younger years, I had to connect through people through the yellow pages. Okay, and you had to go through a third party to get to somebody. So to me, there's a plethora of tools at our disposal.
A couple of the next questions ask about specifics of how to do it. So Laura asks, beyond TikTok, what advice do you have for people who might be earlier in their career and want to engage with someone like you, who relatively speaking has so much more experience? So there's that power dynamic. There's a question about your biggest aha moment in all of this. And Christina asks, how do you connect beyond just the initial call? Like, how do you make sure you're getting that deep relationship happening? I'm going to group those 3 together.
Yeah. Well, none of this is meant to be an overnight thing. Okay. This is not like you're going to meet somebody tomorrow and all of a sudden you're going to have a meaningful, deep relationship, because quite frankly, then it would be fake and it wouldn't last anything. I mean, I can still hear my late mother saying, all good things take time. Right. So relationships take a very, very long and they should take a meaningful, long time to build, because then they will be more sustainable, just like anything else. Oh no, now I forgot the other questions.
The other question was, so if you're young, how do you have that kind of relationship? How do you deal with it if you are, see, I'm losing my thing here. Is there an aha moment that you had this past year that something about the pandemic has kind of been a bit of a surprise to you? And also, and you just answered the one about that deeper relationship, which I agree, it's just not going to be a fast thing. But I think that power dynamic for young people can be a little intimidating.
Well, for any young people who are on the call, I need to learn how to use TikTok. So if you want to connect with me, I will pick up the phone, okay? And I'm sure my employees will be super happy because then I won't have to go to them and be like, "Can somebody teach me how to use this?" Okay.
I love it. I love it.
And I think my aha moment, I don't know if it's necessarily a moment, but the one thing I was terrified the most of in life was, I think I mentioned early in the conversation, was to be alone. And I've made it a year and I'm still here. Okay. And so I think the aha moment is, I can do this. I got this.
I love it. And we're all learning that. Susan McPherson, congratulations on the book. I add my voice to the now dozens and dozens of people who've been sending in congratulations messages along with their questions. I'm so sorry I couldn't get to all of your questions, but the book is phenomenal. We're so excited for you. And congrats. I'm going to send this right back to Anne.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hold on. Can you hear me? I'm trying to come in. We're making start my video. Here we go. Hello, Soledad. Thank you so much. Susan McPherson, thank you for being here tonight, for your wisdom, for your joy, for sharing it with us. One of the things that is so important in making connections is showing up for the people who you are connected, the people who you want to see achieve and succeed. And so I'm going to send everybody away with 3 to-do lists. Popping it up here. To help support this book, please, 1, write a review, give it 5 stars on Goodreads and Amazon. Anyone out there who has written a book, and I know from the chat and Q&A function, there's a lot of authors out there. Those Amazon reviews are so important. Please share the book on your feeds tonight. I've been sitting here getting furious messages on Twitter and Instagram. This is the tag, Susan MPC. 1. Is that right? MPC?
Not McP, MCP1. Susan
MCP1. Sorry, we got it wrong. MCP1 for Susan. And then please buy the book. The list here, 800ceoread.com/the-list. That is a special place where you can go to get a signed copy of the book. And we want to see this book hit the New York Times bestseller list. We are putting it out into the universe now and making it happen for you, Susan. So please support this book in every way you can. I took a note and I just want to say one thing. Susan, thank you for writing a book that is going to make us richer, happier, and live longer. I really feel like there could be no greater promise than that. So I thank you all for joining us tonight. You've got your to-do list, and we'll see you on social. Thank you.
Thank you. Hi. Can somebody save all the questions so I can answer them?
I will, Susan. Thank you.